So here are the 4 bullets of list building. I have set you up to now come into this with an open and active mindset. That is the first bullet. So we're going to use this example of our student and family profile. Students interested in business and engineering, but also just really loves learning, loves all the different disciplines, has a competitive high school record, awesome across the board, and wants the as good of a school as I can get into, but didn't love the high pressure achievement culture of their high school experience. Learns by doing and through discussion. Would like opportunities for internships, maybe some research opportunities, thinks they want a medium-sized school. Everybody wants a medium-sized school, guys. That's always it's the Goldilocks. And the Goldilocks is really hard to come by. Most institutions are either large or 3,000 or fewer. So very, very few medium-sized schools. They tend to be the ones that fall into that tiny little band of super selective. All right, family priorities. We hear this a lot. We're willing to pay for an elite education, but not past that. And then a family will set a budget. So in this example, not going to surpass 60K a year for a non-elite education, elite defined as Ivy League or similar. And then access to opportunities like internships and things like that is important to the family. So these are the resources that I have found that allow for families to be able to access for free. You just have to make an account. College Board has a college search feature that I think does a decent job. And then the College Express, this is awesome. They have a different lists that they curate. So I was just on it tonight looking at building a list for a student, and it was like colleges for the hipsters, and it was like 25 schools that, are really kind of funky types of places. And then there's, schools that care about sustainability, schools that are bike friendly, where students can ride their bikes around campus, like lists that are grouped by silly qualities like that. But then there's also ones that are like schools where most future PhDs did their undergrad. So there's different interesting ways you can do cross sections of lists. So I highly recommend these 2 resources. Don't use one resource for your list building. Just like in your English classes of old, if you're doing a research paper, you absolutely must use a couple different sources. And you're looking to see how many times are the same schools coming out in these different resources. Is the College Board, College Express list, am I seeing the same schools over and over and over again? So it's not just about rankings, it's looking at all these other aspects of a student. And then the Fiske guide, it's a book that has different schools based on their academic, social life, quality of life that students have conveyed, and it has a little write-up about every school, kind of like a magazine article, so to speak. So this is my example initial list that we're going to go from for our next part of the list building. So you've run through the steps in the college search feature, which will ask you a ton of questions about size of school, selectivity, access to majors, things like that. And you're putting in your students' preferences. Ideally, your student is putting this in because it is their process. And having them, I sometimes think that starting with College Express, the different lists are just really fun to look at, lists where it'll even break down schools where, that have the least active Greek life or the most active Greek life. So if you have a student who thinks they want to be in a sorority, starting with that list. So building an initial list by pulling together multiple resources. And then from here, you want to understand what the selectivity is because you want to have a balance. You do not want a list that only has schools that are in that little window of 30% admit rates or lower. We want a range. Now, in this example, this student is a stellar student across the board, has great extracurriculars, awesome writer, all the things. So we can have a whole range. You may have a student where a school like Cornell is not on their list, even though that would be a reach school for everybody. We call it a lottery school because getting in is such small odds. It's kind of like winning the lottery. So You might not have a student where that's in their reach category. That's okay. It all depends on the student and what the right fit is for them. So there's different resources that you can use to get a sense of what the selectivity is of these schools. It's not hard to find. College Board, it'll say right there under admissions what the admit rate is. Um, the more nuanced one, if you want to really dig into the data, you can look at common data set, type in, it's literally you just Google common data set, Bucknell University, and you can look at the most recent year in section C1 and see what the admit rate was for those institutions. But as I said, it's pretty easy to find this. Now, what you have to do for a little extra work is if you want to know the admit rate by major, and if a school admits by major or not, you do have to go to the school's website individually. That's often not published elsewhere to find that info. So here's the example of our selectivity. The list has been reshuffled and regrouped according to selectivity. Our red schools are our lottery schools, super selective, single digits to teens. Our orange schools are still very much reach schools. It's not a slam dunk by any means for any student. And then our blue schools, these would be target schools for a student with the profile I've described. And Purdue is circled in this example because what are we seeing? A breakdown of in and out of state, but also remember our students interested in business and engineering. And anytime we hear business or engineering, we perk up because we know these are hot majors. And engineering at Purdue is hot, hot, hot. And as a result, being an out-of-state student with a hot major, if this student was mine, I would make Purdue an orange. I wouldn't put it as a slam dunk blue or a target. And then the greens are like the slam dunks. These are we feel fairly confident, I'll never say 100%, but extremely confident that an admission is likely. Now we take that student profile in the initial list and we put it at the cross section of affordability. If you've attended other webinars by Joe, you know how to do an SAI calculator. You know that it is mission critical to figure out first, what do colleges think I can pay? Now, willingness to pay is different than what the school thinks I can pay. So you have to complete multiple SAI calculators from multiple sources to get a ballpark or an estimate. These are often most accurate for families with non-variable income. So if your income varies year to year, you'll find that calculators aren't going to give you a great estimate. And be prepared, it's almost always higher than what you anticipated. Then what you're going to want to do is complete net price calculators at all the schools on your students list. Whoops, sorry guys. That way, that net price, what you are going to pay, you have some working knowledge of that. Again, these are estimates, they're never exact. But the best, most accurate net price calculators often are asking for your student's academic profile as well. And then that's, going to give you some information about if they give merit aid or merit scholarships for good grades, etc. All right, so that's the first step. Net price matters because this is what you pay out of pocket. Most families on tonight's webinar, most families that we work with are in this gray area. So there's the high SAI families, meaning high colleges think they can pay an extremely high amount per year and cost net price is not really a consideration or a concern. But then we have a lot of families who could pay the full amount. They have a high SAI, but they might not want to unless it's the elite education. Most families we work with, they'll be stretched to cover the full cost, but they can with personal sacrifice. And then as we get down into lower SAI families, you'll find some families will have maybe a little bit of need-based aid that they qualify for, but then don't quite have enough to cover the gap and have to get private loans. And then families with extra low SAIs, these are the families that qualify for high amounts of need-based aid and could have a really low cost of attendance if they have schools on their list that give a ton of need-based aid. So it's important to know your need status. What do schools think you can pay? Are you going to have a high SAI or a low SAI? The higher your SAI, the more considered you will be a full pay family. And I always put this note on here because it happens every year. A family says, well, we don't want to pay that much. Will we qualify for need-based aid? No, no, no. Unwillingness to pay is not the same as being eligible for need-based aid. And in the United States, the cost of educating your child beyond the senior year falls upon the family largely. Notre Dame recently came out with this awesome graphic to help families at different income brackets see what it would cost them out of pocket based on this considers two kids in college at the same time, so it's not one child. But I thought this was really helpful because most of these graphics that I have found over the years, they stop at 150 in annual income. So it's hard to really know, well, what's that look like as you move up the tier? So they actually stretch theirs to 250. And then you can see like, okay, for a family that makes around 250,000, this is the estimated family cost. Now, the higher up you go, the higher this number goes. All right, so here's what's important. When you are considering your student, it's so important to be objective about your student profile. I have often, and I'll talk about this a lot in our highly selective admissions webinar next Wednesday, but families, we get it. I get it. I think my kid is the greatest thing on the planet. But at the end of the day, most of our students are doing extracurricular activities that are what most admissions officers would call standard. They are not above and beyond and incredibly impressive. Even if they got all the trophies, that's still it playing basketball. That might be a standard activity compared to, you know, a student who has come up with some new organization all on their own and raised a bunch of money, things like that. So really distinctive extracurriculars and character. So it's really important to be objective about your student's profile when you're looking at this vertical axis here. Then we have our payment axis. High SAI, full pay families, low SAI, need-based families. So what we end up having is 4 quadrants. We have this quadrant, the full pay families with, if you're way up here with a really standout student, then anything is on the table in terms of types of schools to put on your list. Then you have quadrant 2, 3, and 4 as we go around. This graphic here, I have linked in the resources slide at the end. This was put together by the Independent Educational Consultants Association. This is my professional association. And it really helps families understand what types of schools, real quick as like a snapshot, their student could have on their list. So you've got down here, I'm going to focus on the middle because this is where a lot of families are. You have an average student, standard, it's okay. Average academic profile, average extracurricular profile, and maybe, middle income families in the United States on average, it's around 100 and maybe 20,000, 150,000 total family income. So that puts everybody kind of right here in the middle. And these bullet points go through the types of schools that might be the best fits for a student with this need profile, so this financial profile and this academic profile. And then we have, okay, what about a family that's lower income, really awesome, strong student profile? Highly selective schools that meet 90% or more of demonstrated financial need would be ones for students with this family and financial profile to consider. So this graphic is linked at the end, and it gives you very quickly what types of schools you should be targeting for your financial profile to still come out with an affordable list. So this is what I was just mentioning, researching financial aid policies. These are the key phrases. What percent of need does this school meet if you are a family that has a low SAI? And if so, what's the average need-based scholarship or grant that's awarded? and what percentage of students are getting need-based aid. The higher that percentage, the higher the odds that any student with need will be awarded money. And you can locate that on the common data set. So for families that do not have a high SAI or have a low SAI, so families that would be considered full pay, no need-based aid, you're paying attention to the percentage of non-need students receiving merit aid awards and the average merit award they're being offered. And then these resources are also mentioned at the end. But the two I'm going to talk about tonight, and the one I'm really going to emphasize next, is Big J Consulting. This is a consulting company like the one that I'm director of college planning for. They make public a resource list that has a snapshot of multiple schools. Now, it is limited to about 500 schools, so I'm not going to pretend every school's on here. But schools that have the common data set would be your next level of where you could go to find this information. So let's go with the profile I mentioned for the example student. This is a low need student, excellent student, and these are the wild card and reach schools that were on that initial list. So these should all look familiar. Now let's go across the graphic. We're seeing total cost of out of state, size of school, we can ignore that. And then come over here, these columns, these last three columns. This student has low need. So it's highly unlikely they're going to qualify for any need-based aid. So we can ignore this column with the green graphs. Let's come over here. What percent, the far right column, of non-need students, like mine, get any kind of merit aid for their awesome grades? Let's go down this list. We can see right off the bat, no merit scholarships are being granted by Colgate or Cornell or University of Virginia. Very few, only 5%, so these would be the top of the top of the top of the outstanding students, are being awarded any kind of merit aid at WashU. So the merit at these schools is the getting in, not the money. So if you are a family that maybe is low need but doesn't want to pay past a certain budget, you know right away, okay, even if my kid gets into UVA, I'm on the hook for $80,000 because my SAI might be, I don't know, $312,000. And then we come up here. Same with Colgate, same with Cornell. So this is important information when you're building the list. If I don't want to pay this much, I should kick these off the list. Now, come over here to CASE. 83% of students are getting merit scholarships at CASE. Now, is it still super expensive? In my opinion, yeah. But here's the average merit award. Be careful with averages because it can be more, it can be less, but still encouraging to note. Okay, so if my kiddo gets in, I can expect something in the ballpark of, I'll lowball it and say 25K discount. Cool, okay. Bucknell, they better be the top 20% of that admitted class, but there's still a chance, so that could become a discount. But now you can start to see how this information is incredibly useful when you're trying to build out a list. Now let's flip the script and pretend I'm a high need student, excellent student profile, but really low SAI. Maybe my SAI is 1,000. Family, very low income. Now, the types of schools on here, 100% of need is met. 100%, 100%, 100%. Now I know these are the types of schools. I have an excellent profile. I should go for it. Even Bucknell, even Case Western, these are still very high for a high need student. All right. Now, let's look at our target and likely schools and we'll wrap up. So these were the schools that were on the target and likely list. So we see the cost, still pretty pricey. And we come over here, but we see for the most part, Syracuse, they don't release their numbers, which is really annoying. So this would be a phone call to their financial aid office. But otherwise, these schools do release their numbers. So I'm seeing, okay, If my kid gets into Loyola University Chicago, and this is a school that was in the green, this was a high likely school, not only that, but they have a likelihood of getting a significant scholarship. 94% of students do. This is the average. My kid is top of the top of the top, and I happen to know Loyola has a full tuition scholarship that's competitive scholarship, but my kid could be in the pool of candidates invited to compete for it. So now I'm understanding that Loyola could be a good fit for my student. And let's pretend I'm that awesome student with high need. Well, Loyola also meets 83% of demonstrated needs. So between my merit scholarship and my need-based aid, I might have a really low price tag at Loyola Chicago. You could make the same argument with Baylor. Ohio State, keep in mind this number, the 7,000 state schools, these numbers are always including out of state. So it's not representing in-state student merit awards only. So if you're an in-state student, your odds of having something, you'll be likely more close to like 1,000 or 2,000. So this can inform what schools stay on as your likely schools. University of Pittsburgh is a public school. It's almost $60,000 for out-of-state students. Your student's an out-of-state student. They're really strong, but maybe they're not top 21% of incoming students strong. And we don't really qualify for any need. So are you willing to go all in for Pitt at 60,000? These are decisions and conversations you and your family can have as you build the list. So I will close the money part of this with this quote from the same folks who make these resources available, Big J Consulting. One of the co-owners, her name is Jenny Kent, and she says all the time, you can chase merit or prestige, but not both. And that is true almost always. There are some schools like Case Western that are, more prestigious, but often at your, we're not seeing the Ivy Leagues giving out merit scholarships. And families in the upper middle income tend to be the ones that find themselves in that we could stretch and make personal sacrifice, but we don't want to. So it's really important to understand where your financial profile is. I'll cover this much, much more in depth next week, but understanding that colleges are a business and they have to look at the bottom line, and they will always admit a certain percentage of students whose family can pay the full cost of attendance. So this is a good visual to understand that. So they have to make some revenue to reinvest back into the school, to pay staff, to pay the bills, keep the lights on. So if they're admitting a high need student and a full pay student, that full pay student is subsidizing the high need student. If you're admitting another full pay student, they don't need a discount. You might have room for a high to middle income family where they have some need, but not a lot. And that's where you make the tuition revenue. So our goal is to have a continuum of both selectivity and affordability when you're making a list. So here at the top in the light blue, we're seeing selectivity continuum. So we want some likely and safety schools, we want target schools, and schools that are a reach for your student. Similarly, we want that with affordability. These are the ones in the white boxes. We want schools where your student is likely to receive a high amount of merit or need-based aid, or the cost of attendance is totally in range and comfortable for your family, and you can afford that without funding much or any of it out of pocket or with any kind of gap. And then target schools would be those where your student might be likely to receive some financial aid, but the cost of attendance or the gap is still comfortable for your family to manage. And maybe it'd just be borrowing a little bit of federal money. What we don't want is reach schools when it comes to affordability. Putting yourself on the hook with a reach school if your student gets in and it's out of your comfort zone to pay for, and your student gets in, that's a really hard conversation because they're excited and now financially it might not be doable. So have those conversations in advance. This will be sent out in the recording. This is going out as a PDF and attached to the recording email. You can see these are the resources that I referenced throughout this presentation tonight. And I've made this very clear. Realistic assessments, conversations with your student, introspection, and student engagement.